Now it's time for the star of the video, and that's installing this Belltech drop kit. Now, while this kit is specifically for the C3500, the parts and process are essentially going to be the same for any truck. This kit comes with rear C-notch, a rear axle flip kit, drop spindles, drop springs, and shocks, and really everything that you need to slam your truck. Now, while I have the entire suspension apart, I'm going to go ahead and do some service work. So I ordered upper and lower control arms, new tie rod ends, new wheel bearings, and new bushings for the rear leaf springs. I also ordered Belltech's front and rear sway bar kit to get this truck handling a lot better than what it does now. But the first thing I'm going to do on this install is start putting in this C-notch. I decided to start by removing the leaf springs. Now this is going to give me some more room, and I know I'm going to be raising and lowering the truck to see where the C-notch is going to be in relation to the axle.
Oh yeah, that is it. Okay, now that we have one of the leaf springs out, we're going to take off this nut and remove this helper spring. Sorry, I'm a little out of breath. And then we're going to replace our bushings too. So there are two sizes. There's 1 3/8 and 1.5 inches. I don't know what size this is, so I just ordered both kits. So I guess we'll find out. But all right, let's get started on taking this apart.
To disassemble the leaf springs, you break loose the nut that's on top of the bolt that goes through the leaf springs, and the Belltech kit provides a new bolt that goes through the spring pack. So here I actually install the bolt from the bottom up when you're supposed to install it from the top down, but I did figure this out later and swap the bolt around. Then you can cut the excess bolt off and leave about a 1/2 inch above that long nut. Now we can replace our bushings. I drilled through the original bushing material with this drill bit, and I pressed the steel sleeve through the bushing. Now this was pretty tough to get out. Once I got that out, I was able to cut through the original bushing material with this Sawzall and pry out the rubber material with this screwdriver. This leaf spring had a steel sleeve that I had to cut out, and once that was removed, I could grease up the new rubber inserts and new sleeve and install them in the leaf spring eyelet. Now that we got the leaf springs out of the way, I actually just finished putting a coat of paint on them. We can move to marking out where our C-notch is going to be. Now, I will admit I had some issues understanding the instructions. So here's the template that comes with the kit, and let me show you why I'm a little confused. So right here, this line, it says the guide hole A and the large guide hole C in the template should be placed towards the front of the truck on both sides of the frame. So here's guide hole A and large guide hole C. They both cannot be faced towards the front of the truck at the same time. So I don't really know what they're trying to say here, but I talked to one of my buddies, Angel Kurtz down in South Florida. He's put on a couple of these kits. He said your guide hole A is going to go right here where the brake line was on the driver's side. So that's going to go right there. And then your guide hole C is going to line up with your brake line bracket. And when you do the other side, you simply move the template just like this. So now the markings are going to be facing the inside of the frame. So this should be where the axle goes. So we'll lay this out and we'll pull the axle up and see exactly where we're sitting. Okay, that's about where it's supposed to be. So I'm going to take a punch and I'm going to punch. So there is our mark, and of course we're removing this. Let me go get the C-notch. The line looks good, so now we just got to pull our axle up and see where it sits. I think I'm going to go ahead and remove the shocks now to just get those out of the way, because if I jack this rear end up, it's going to want to push it out of line. So I'm going to remove these shocks, and then we'll bring the truck down a little bit and pick the rear end up and see where it sits. So here's our notch. Here's our axle. But yeah, I think that is in the right spot. After staring at these measurements for what seems like hours, I think I finally have the courage to make this cut. I've had the truck up and down half a dozen times. I just want to make sure that when I make this cut, I don't have to go back and redo it. And I want to make sure the C-notch is in the right spot. So based off the template and what I see, I think I'm ready to do it. Before we start cutting, we have to drill holes in each of the corners to make sure that we're not going to have any stress cracks once we get the C-notch cut out. And you want to make sure that you don't have any wiring or any fuel lines or brake lines on the inside of the frame when you're making your cuts. If you cut through one of those, well, I don't think I have to explain to you what happens. I wasn't able to get a drill bit in here to drill these corners out, so I'm just gonna grab a burr tool and I'm just gonna notch this out a little bit. And then let's test fit this C-notch. Looks like we're off on our holes by a 1/4 inch or so. We're hitting right here, so I'll probably come back a little more. I'm gonna cut this old bump off the axle tube, and then I'm gonna drop the truck down to see where we're at. The axle is pretty much centered in the opening. So I think the next step is let's get the leaf spring set in place and then see if that's gonna move the axle forward or backward. But if it stays pretty much where it's at, which I think it'll be pretty close to this, we should be in good shape. All right, so here's how it's really gonna look. So this is the old saddle right here. This is the new saddle. So remember that bolt that we put in our spring pack? That's gonna come up and line up with the front hole of this new saddle. This is what they recommend to weld to the axle tube. With everything loosely set in place, our C-notch is pretty much centered over our axles. So I think I'm gonna go ahead and get a couple of bolts in this side, and then I'm gonna tackle the other side, which is essentially just repeating everything that we just did over here. I got the C-notch bolted in place. I had to sneak it under this bed brace. I noticed that once I got this in place, I took a step back and I looked at the bed, and the bed floor had a high spot in it. It was raised because this pushes, since it wraps over the top of the frame, it pushes up on this bed brace by, you know, 1/4 inch or 5/16 or however thick this steel is. I'm gonna notch this brace and then I'm gonna notch the other side. And here's what your notch will look like. Now you could come back in with some sheet metal and weld that in, brace this all up, but I'm not gonna use this as a work truck. This is gonna be strictly a show truck, and I may tow a trailer with, you know, the C10 or the Blazer on it. But if I have an issue with the bed floor flexing, I'll come back and brace this, but I think I'm gonna leave it as is right now. Repeated the same process on this side. We got our brace notched out. We got the C-notch cut and tacked in and cut the bump stop on the axle. So next we're gonna install our saddle and wedge, and then the U-bolts on, it's hard to see back here, guys, on the axle, because I want the leaf spring to be attached to the axle when we drop this down to see exactly where all this is going to go together. It's still going down. Still going down. Okay, let me get this bedside down and then really get an idea on what we're working with. Well, I'm gonna take the cover off so I can get some squatted truck shots, but I think this is ready to go together. To drill out the holes in the C-notch, I started with a 1/4 inch drill bit and finished with a 1/2 inch drill bit. Then I could install the fasteners and torque them all down. Then I could torque down the U-bolts for the axle and move over and torque down all of the bolts for the leaf springs. Ah, my finger. Now we can install our shock extenders by using this bolt and sleeve, and then you drill a 5/16 hole through the shock extender bracket into the original shock mount. Now you can bolt that together and install your shock. To finish up the rear part of the drop kit, we're going to install this 2-inch carrier bearing spacer. This spacer is needed to correct the drive shaft angle now that the axle is flipped above the leaf springs and the back of the truck is significantly lower than stock. Now that we have the rear section about 90% done, minus the sway bar, I'm going to start on doing the front drop. Before I start taking apart everything to get to the springs, shocks, upper and lower control arms, I'm going to go ahead and replace the tie rod ends without lifting the truck off the ground so I can limp this thing to the alignment shop. Now that our new tie rod ends are installed, I can go ahead and start disassembling this front end. Here I'm taking off the brake caliper. There's 2 Allen head bolts on the back side of the caliper. Once those are removed, the caliper slides right off of the rotor and you could set it on a jack stand and move it out of the way. Next, we can remove our dust cap, which is deep inside of this rotor. Luckily, there are a couple of access holes that you can use to pry it off. You can also remove the cotter pin through these holes as well, and then we can remove our spindle nut.
Hey, it worked. Okay, we got that bearing fell out. Oh yeah.
Now that the rotor's off, I can remove the dust shield that's attached to the spindle.
I realized you guys probably don't want to watch the back of me work on this stuff, so bring you in a little bit. Anyway, we got the nut off of our upper control arm. So we're gonna try to beat it out, get this out of the way. Can you see back there? You can't see nothing. You can't see anything from right there either. I'm sorry, guys, I'm trying. You just remove the cotter pin. So now the castle nut is just a regular nut. Looks kind of funny. It's a funny looking nut. Oh, we just try to break her loose here. Okay, this one might be a little more difficult. This one looks a little more corroded. Okay.
This spindle was really stuck on the lower ball joint, and I didn't record me using my ball joint removal tool, which is just a fork that spreads the spindle and the lower control arm and forces it off of that ball joint. Here I'm removing the shock. There is 1 nut on top, and then there's 2 bolts on the bottom. Once you remove those fasteners, it comes right out of the bottom of the control arm.
All right, got our shock out. Had to cut the top of the bolt for the sway bar. The bottom of the bolt was kicked out, so I wasn't gonna be able to back it out. So now that the shock's out of the way, because it runs up through the middle of the spring, and we got our sway bar disconnected, we should be able to drop this down. Releases the tension from the spring. There it goes. Not sketchy at all. Oh.
Removing these upper control arm bolts was way more difficult than I thought it would be, but after I got them out, I realized I screwed up, and you'll see why here in just a minute.
So see this flat spot right here? Well, if you turn the shaft and these adjustment washers are on it, the washer is going to spin and it's going to lock itself in place, which is exactly what happens. So when you're removing these upper control arm bolts, you only remove the nut. Because if you turn the shaft and you keep rotating it, it's going to jam up these washers and make it really difficult to get off. I ordered some new ones. They'll be here later today, so let's keep working on the suspension.
when I got the frame ready to paint, I degreased all this stuff and cleaned it up pretty good. So really all I'm trying to do is just get a coat of paint on it, because I'll probably come back and replace these and the other you know, rubber brake lines and stuff. They look like they're in pretty good shape. I mean, they are cracking just a little bit, but they're not too bad. I just can't stand like putting new parts on and then having something that just looks like obviously like garbage. And again, this is just some cheap grill paint, because I don't really plan on replacing this later. The reason I went with grill paint, because it's a high temp. So if these get a little warm while they're operating, it's not a big deal. Yeah, while I'm waiting on those new fasteners to come in, I went ahead and popped off the other wheel, ground off the top of that bolt, knocked it through so we could take off our sway bar right here, which should be just these 4 bolts. There we go. Here we go. That's the right one. It's like, guys, if you're doing this job and you got a 30-year-old truck, like, just bite the bullet and get the new upper and lower control arms, because I mean, you're putting all this work into it anyway, right? So these are our bolts. I did not destroy these, which is cool. But I'm wondering if this is going to be like a pretty snug fit. This is a little awkward, but that's cool. We're used to doing awkward things. Close, I can't see anything. It is not even close. Oh, it's not even close. How about the back? All right, putting that one in backwards for now. Might grab the jack. Oh, watch your fingers, buddy. I think I got it. I think I got it, fellas. Ladies, too. Let's go ahead and destroy these threads. How about that? And look what I got. I got new bolts from O'Reilly's. Remember, kids, don't turn the bolts, turn the nut. Let's grab our long punch again, just kind of make our adjustments here. If you know the torque specs for these upper and lower control arms, drop a comment below. Because I don't have a manual, and the interwebs said 121 for the top and 141 on the bottom once the full load is on the suspension. But if that's wrong, let me know. First thing we do is throw in our spring. Now this kit does come with these spacers, so if you didn't want to do the full drop, you can throw these in. This will give you an inch of lift, or if the truck's sitting crooked, you could throw these in one side and that'll help level it out. But we're going with the maximum drop. All right, so now that it feels like the spring's in place, the end of the spring, there's an indentation in the lower control arm. You just want to make sure that it's seated in there. And then start putting some pressure on it. We'll grab our drop spindle. Belltech was nice enough to label these drop spindles for you. Steering knuckle goes forward. We'll go ahead and throw on this nut. There we go. So these shocks come with an upper boot, and the shocks that I removed did not have a boot on them. So I think I'm gonna do the same. Repeat that process. And then there's two nuts that go up top. Tighten this other nut down, and that'll lock it in place. I'm gonna grab our rotor, pack the new wheel bearings, get that all set up, and slide this whole assembly right in place. All right, got our dust shield on. I got the new bearings in. The races look fine, so that was pretty easy. So I'm just gonna goop some lube on the spindle to help this slide on, and then we'll put this sucker on. Yes. Oh yeah, you feel that? Just want to top her off. Tightening her up. All right, we have no play, and we have free movement. And then we'll put in our cotter pin, and this will pretty much be done. Put the dust cap back on it. The rotor will be set. I could take off the tape. I painted it, so I just left some tape on there, which helped actually protect it from all the grease. Then we'll throw on our caliper. Got the caliper on, and that's pretty much the front drop kit in a nutshell. You just got your spring shocks and spindles, and that's gonna put this truck on the ground. So I wanted to show you guys, when I put my caliper on, I had to bend this brake line to go behind the ball joint. When I was testing the turning, I noticed that the brake line was pulling across the ball joint when you were taking a left-hand turn. So now that this side's pretty much wrapped up, we'll do the other side. Now that the passenger side is all complete, I can turn my attention to the sway bar. So this sway bar goes right back into the stock location. You simply grease up each of the bushings, install the mounting brackets, and then you can install the sway bar to the lower control arm. When you're installing this long bolt for the sway bar, you sandwich the sway bar with bushings, put the bolt through, then there's a sleeve, and then you sandwich the lower control arm with another set of bushings, and you can bolt it all together. I wasn't able to get that bottom bushing mounted on the control arm, so I'm gonna have to shave a little bit off of these sleeves. Now we should have plenty of clearance between the front sway bar and the tie rod end, but this sleeve slides over the main fastener like this, so once we take a little bit out of that, we should have enough room to put on that bottom bushing. All right, that works. So I'm gonna install the other side and then torque these down, and I can start putting on the rear sway bar. Installing the rear sway bar was a little trickier. There wasn't an existing sway bar before, so I wasn't really sure how it was supposed to mount to the axle. So I just took my time, read the directions, and ended up mounting the driver's side mount for the sway bar inside of the shock mount, mounting the passenger side inside of the shock mount as well. Now that I have the truck on the ground and the entire suspension is under its own weight, I can mark this rear sway bar. Now you don't want to push this sway bar all the way up to the frame. You want it to stand off from the frame about where it's going to sit once all the bushings and the sleeve is installed. So I'm going to mark this and drill it out. But unfortunately, I cannot bring the camera under here with me. It's just too tight, but I'll check in with you guys in just a bit. Well, I just buttoned up the rear sway bar install, and that means this drop kit is pretty much complete. I'm just gonna go back through and retorque everything, but I wanna hear from you guys and gals, what did you think of this Belltech drop kit for the C2500 and 3500 trucks? Is this something that you throw on your own truck, or would you rather leave your suspension stock, or would you rather lift it? But that's gonna do it for me on this video, guys and gals. I'm gonna cut it off here and get this truck ready to go to the alignment shop in a couple of days. Be sure to visit belltech.com for any of your suspension needs. As always, I really appreciate you watching, and I'll see you in the next video.